Hey, hello, howdy, how you doing? Welcome to part 7 of the 1000 Day series. I really meant for this to be more of a grinding episode, but as you'll see pretty early on, plans never seem to go as intended. For the sake of keeping this intro around 30 seconds, I'm gonna rapid fire some plugs and then we can get the ball rolling. I have a Discord that you should totally join. Once you're there, you can join my PZ server where we have a decent chunk of the community that likes to spend a lot of their time. I'm sure you've seen me there if you've caught any of the streams. I also have a Patreon and YouTube memberships now, so if you like what I do and want to support the channel, that's the best way to do so. Links for all of these are down in the description below, but let's get into the video. Hey you guys, post-editing Preds here. I'm sure you've noticed by now, but this video ends on day 701 instead of 700. That's because I actually overlapped my script on day 693, meaning that for the last 7 days or so, I'm actually 1 day behind on my audio. Basically, I refer to day 701 as day 700 in this episode. It does nothing for the outcome of the video or the content that actually takes place in the video, but just something worth noting. But anyway, let's keep it moving. Kicking things off, I spent 601 and 602 just working on tailoring. I know, just what you all want to see so early on in the episode, and don't worry, because immediately after that, I spent the next 7 days cycling between sprinting and nimble. Basically, every morning I would wake up and reenact scenes from the Blair Witch Project until around 11 or noon, when I'd switch gears and either run sprints in the hallways or outside on the rooftop. Once I was exerted, I'd rest until I recovered, and then I'd do 60 minutes of sit-ups before ending my day doing more nimble training. I did this from days 603 to 610. Now, I already know some of you are panicking because we're 10 days in and we're really only a few minutes into the episode. This is going to be a little different episode than I normally do. Now, don't freak out. It's still going to follow the normal format, and there's still going to be action and complaining and long-winded rants about nothing, and there's going to be a much higher focus on grinding skills though. That being said, this is probably the most dramatic episode in the entire series, and also features the most amount of traveling out of any other episode, so just hang in there, the cool things are coming. The only thing out of the ordinary in these first 10 days was that on day 605, I heard a banging noise and noticed that a zombie had broken in through the back door. It took a while for me to realize that I had never sealed a window behind the stairs, which was letting zombies in through the garage and into my base. Looking at my skills on 611 and seeing no progress in sprinting or my nimble skill was pretty depressing. But I do see a couple that I think we'll be able to knock out or at least make significant improvements on. Tailoring would be a breeze, maybe a week of grinding away at it, or just at the end of every day spend a few hours and then eventually I'd be there. Cooking would be the easiest of the skills since I could either get there passively through making soup, or I could actually spend some time making food with all the items I'd collected last episode. Mechanics was another one that, while a little far away, I think I could chunk away at if I found any other cool vehicles to add to the collection with. Moving over to combat, aiming and reloading would without a doubt be the easiest skills. I was already almost level 10 aiming, and was over halfway for reloading, which should be super quick to wrap up. My big issues were with melee weapons. I'd been way too inconsistent over the last year or so with just grabbing whatever weapons I had available to me and throwing some levels into each, with long blunt and long blade carrying the majority of the workload. I spent a lot of the last episode working on my axe skills, so it would really be up to choice here. Started off 611 taking inventory of my weapons. I had about 6 axes, 13 long blunt, 13 short blunt, and around 30 short blade. 3 long blade, and spear I really didn't count because no matter what I can always just make more. But for the sake of it, 21 spears. When looking at it this way, I had most XP in long blunt, and about equal, literally within 1 XP point of each other, would be short blunt and short blade. Now, here's why numbers aren't super important in any of this. My maintenance skill levels regardless of the weapon type, and long blunt, unlike blades, have no weapons that have 1-2 hit kills. For example, my katana is a 1-shot kill and machetes are 2-shot kill unless exerted. Because of that, I decided that I would primarily focus on my long blade skilling, with primary weapons being my machetes and the katana. Figured today would be a good day. When I was leaving the school, I found a Mustang and was probably the best condition I've ever found one in. I hotwired it and decided to tow the police cruiser behind me. When I got back to base, I spent time decorating before ending the day playing Kaboom, the world's greatest arcade game. On 612, I was getting an early start to the day, trying my best to do super simple math when I leveled up my tailoring, so naturally, I spent 612 reading the final tailoring book. Since it was early enough, I was actually able to just chug away at it and finish around 9 PM. So here's a tip, for people with a slow reader trait, it takes around 17 hours in game to read the mastery books. After spending the first 12 days doing absolutely nothing exciting, I decided to head out to the bridge to pull in some more zombies. The goal wasn't just combat though, I actually wanted to gather enough tailoring materials to pound through the final levels and move on to the next skill. So So it was a pretty basic setup. I'd turn on the siren and spam Q to gather any zombies in the area, and then whip out the katana and one-shot anything in swinging distance. Tried to keep the zombies in piles so that I could go through after and just mass gather ripped sheets and leather strips. I'll let a couple of these scenes play out since I'm sure a lot of you are starving for some action at this point, so here you go. 6:14 was spent working on reloading. It was snowing out and had a massive wind chill, and I didn't feel like running around in that shit, so I chose to spend it at the base reloading my 5.56 mags. 6:15 was a heavy looting day. Basically what I'd do was drive down the road, lay on the horn, clear out the zombies, and then go building to building grabbing anything that I felt like might be useful, which ended up really just being a bunch of canned goods. Got a couple more pieces for the Jeep upgrades, but my big issue was that I didn't have a Jeep to put any of this shit on. So it was a little strange to me that I was finding Mustangs, but not Jeeps or motorcycles or anything like that, but it is what it is, to be honest. On 6/16, I decided to test out some nail bombs. They're basically pipe bombs, but without the explosion and fire, but with all the damage. It seemed like they'd be pretty cool to use in a tight situation, and I was chucking them out at Mach 5. At one point, I threw in so hard it phased through a house and disappeared into another dimension, so there's that. Spent the morning of 6/17 just walking through the side neighborhood to the north. I was looking for a fight, but really didn't find much here, and it turned out to be more of a looting run. By early afternoon, I was over it and decided to just spend the rest of the day doing some more tailoring. 6/18 was another grind day. The morning was focused on reloading before I realized I wasn't getting anywhere with it, and switched back to tailoring. Finally capped off level 9, and now I can say we're on the home stretch. When I was thinking of what I wanted to do this episode, I found myself stuck on the idea that I had to stay here another 100 days. I think that has been the big trend where I feel the need to stay in a city once I get there, and that's just not the case. Really wanted to branch out and go to a place that a lot of people know about, but rarely tend to visit. Since it's been almost 2 years in game, it'd be a difficult trek to get there, so I decided I'd need to hit Nimble level 4 before attempting that, just due to the amount of zombies that would be there and really just the sheer difficulty to get to this location. Alright, I've been sitting here for like 2 hours now and I'm losing my mind. This is taking forever and I haven't even gone up 100 XP yet. For content's sake, I'm gonna put this on the back burner for now and just say fuck it. I remembered I had some pretty high powered weapons from last episode and figured I would just have to use those if I got in trouble. 6/21 was absolutely devastating. I've never had this happen to me before. I woke up at 4:30 very confused because I normally sleep in much longer than that. Walked out into the hallway to see the entire school up in flames. I immediately went to, did I leave the oven on? Did I accidentally hit something? Did a zombie that's on fire walk over and enter the school somehow? No. The answer was much simpler than that. The only reasoning I could think of was the generator on the second floor must have went up in flames at some point and started the fire that I couldn't contain. Luckily, the airlocks would buy me some time, so I sprung to action, grabbing anything that I could salvage. My workshop was completely gone. All of my resources, materials, metal, nails, various tools, gone. All my magazines and most of my guns, gone. I was able to salvage a decent amount of ammo and a few guns, including the grenade launcher, but anything in the cabinets was lost. Over 50 magazines belonging to various guns, over 10,000 rounds of ammo, either boxed or shelled. I did manage to grab most of my melee weapons and make my way to the kitchen, where I could grab a lot of the food, but everything else was gone. And the fire was spreading. I loaded up the trailer and hopped in my car as the fire spread to the right side of the school. This base was completely uninhabitable at this point, and I was forced to evacuate into the unknown. Without really having an idea of where to go, I found myself at the Spiffos that I had based at on my journey to Riverside back in part 5. Once again, this would be my safe haven for the night. I wasn't really sure where I should go. This was kind of a giant mindfuck to me. This threw off all my plans and objectives that I'd wanted to accomplish this episode. But looking at the positives, I was still alive. I had food, water, guns, and a shit ton of ammo with me. Still had a Mustang and a large trailer. I could have stayed in West Point and relocated, but after losing the base, West Point was the last place I really wanted to be. Actually, I decided I'd go the furthest place I could think of from West Point. That would still be viable. At around 9:10 that morning, I hit a zombie and spun out the Mustang, crashing it into a tree. I really just can't catch a break right now. I arrived in March Ridge early in the afternoon and drove out to the northwest side of the city to establish some type of foothold. By evening, I'd cleared out the cell enough that I felt comfortable to set up shop in a house at the end of the road. Tomorrow would be absolute chaos, and I wanted to be fully prepared for it. On the morning of 6/23, I began by making my way down one of the main roads, screaming for any zombies in the vicinity to wander in front of me before being sliced down. Made it to the community center around 9:30 and decided to switch over to the SCAR. I probably look like an absolute maniac to the random NPC sitting in his house watching this all unfold, but since there is no random NPC sitting here watching, I figured someone ought to see it, so here you guys go. Days 6/24 and 6/25 were much the same. I got an early start on the day and spent most of my time grouping up larger hordes before taking them on. Had an injured hand, so the katana didn't swing nearly as fast, but it still got the job done for the most part. As always, words probably aren't going to do it justice, so here's some more clips of the carnage that unfolded on my second and third days back in March Ridge. Day 626 was going to be my base building day. As if there was any other rational choice, I decided to base up in the community center. But I had no nails and no saw, so I had a checklist. Time to go shopping. As far as I know, there are no warehouses in March Ridge. I'd honestly be surprised if there were any garages in March Ridge. But I do know there are some warehouses off the highway that I visited back in part 2, so that's where I headed. I actually was able to find a saw and a box of nails at one of the trucks in the middle of the road. This was one of the few times in this playthrough that I was actually really picky about what I found at the warehouse. Tried to keep it to only items that I needed at this current point in time. When it was time to leave, I couldn't resist getting out of the car and clearing out a horde that had grouped up on the highway. Fortunately, my katana did break in the process, and it was a really bittersweet moment having to say goodbye to a weapon that I had obtained all the way back in part 3. I knew it was coming eventually, so we just gotta keep it moving. Anyway, back at the community center, I started laying a framework for choke points similar to how I did in the school in West Point. Base would be primarily on the second floor, but I still wanted to keep the ground floor secure as well. 627 was more framework on the ground floor. The goal was to block off the stairs so that I could move around the second floor relatively safely without zombies breaking in. 628 was a continuation of the previous day, just cutting down more trees and stockpiling planks. Nothing really happened today. It was relatively quiet aside from the occasional zombie that came walking over whenever I was grabbing planks, but other than that, we can keep it moving. On 629, I ran out of nails while building out the walls in the community center. Normally, I'd go back out to the warehouses, but it was already close to 3 p.m. and I was completely exhausted, so I decided to head back to the house that I'd based out of when I first got here. On the morning of day 630, I went back out to the warehouses to check for any scraps and found a sledgehammer in one of the crates, which was a huge win since mine was lost in the fire. I didn't really find much else there though. Got a couple more boxes of nails and a pack of cabbage seeds, but that was about it. Instead of leaving and heading back to base, I decided to once again go to war with the army of zombies hanging out around the highway. When I got back to March Ridge, I spent the rest of the day disassembling doors at various houses around to gather hinges and door handles for the base. 631 was spent on the interior of the base. I brought up and repaired the generator, so I finally had power again, which was nice. After that, I cleared out one of the side classrooms to turn it into a big storage room. It still need to be built out more, obviously, but not a bad start. On 632, I grabbed a bed from one of the houses and started building out my bedroom in one of the vacant rooms. I also grabbed a sledgehammer and destroyed most of the glass framing that was already broken and then rebuilt the walls. This place was slowly becoming more like home every day. On 633, I took all the inventory out of the trailer and moved it into the new storage room. From there, I started to organize items into crates, and again, this would definitely need to be cleaned up, but a good starting point nonetheless. I spent the next few days setting up and organizing various rooms in my new home. The room across from my bedroom would become my new armory. I had set up a pretty bare-bones storage room for my odds and ends, and I already had a kitchen built out, but I wanted to do something with the room section as well. Had a lot of decorating to get done, and as usual, very few creative ideas as how to make the base a spectacle. Cleanup was tedious and really more of a chore than base decoration, but I'd never been much of a decorator to begin with. 636 was a looting run to some of the houses in the southwest for me. I was more so looking for decorative items like flags, maps, anything that stood out to me, along with any useful items like cooking pots and stuff like that. On the morning of 637, I assessed the damage done to my car. The hood was at 0, the windshield was gone, and the engine was completely shot. Not too bad, if I had to say so myself. I had some tuning gear and could disassemble items nearby to gather some protection. Tires were in bad shape, but I've dealt with worse. Suspensions were in good condition and the brakes were fine for the most part. Everything is fixable, is what I'm trying to say. Really just came down to what was a necessity and what could be delayed for now. After messing around with a couple of vehicles in the area, I realized Mustangs may not be the play. There are more heavy-duty parts around that I could use in much more accessible variety. So I chose a mail truck as my next primary. It may not be as flashy, but it'd definitely get the job done, at least for now. On 638, I went back out to the warehouses for the third time this episode. This time, however, it was for all the sandbags that were still sitting there. All in all, when I left the warehouse for what I hoped would be the final time, I had around 90 sandbags in my trailer that I would use to decorate the base a little bit more. 639 was spent placing all of those sandbags in the walkway up to the community center, more of a bona fide driveway. Nothing special happened today since this took up so much time, but with time I did have left, I managed to reload my magazines and take inventory on my gear. Spent 640 chopping down more trees to gather planks for some water catchers. The plan would be to start a small garden on the rooftop of the school. Really, the entire day was spent gathering planks and then going to nearby shops for garbage bags. I was also overweight again, so if you're wondering why I'm always starving, it's because I belong in that show, My 600-Pound Life. 641 was the start of adding an expansion onto the base. I built out a ton of the framing on the second floor roof and added a set of stairs leading up to the third story. 642 was much of a continuation from the previous day. While cutting some trees down, I came across what must have been a former military pilot. Just thought that was super cool to see him all geared up and still walking around, so I gave him a proper ending with some dignity. 643 was almost entirely spent just moving logs and planks from the trailer back onto the second floor. After that was taken care of, I began building out the walls of the expansion before running out of nails that night. Wasn't really sure where to find nails in March Ridge, so I decided to shift focus and began clearing out the area. In the morning of 644, I geared up and made my way out to the southwestern zone and began clearing zombies door by door. There weren't any large hordes out there like there were on the entrance to March Ridge or my first few days here, though I'm sure I'd run into a couple eventually. This was really pretty easy work though. Zombies really are no match for a fully kitted Scar and a 357 Magnum. And here's what the first day looked like. .645 and 646 were more or less the same. Much less fighting than I was expecting, but I did find an ATV and a fuel tanker, which would be great additions if I could fix them up and bring them back. I started using noisemakers to pull zombies in, but even when I used them, only a handful would show up. Either I had cleaned out the majority or they'd roamed out of the city. I spent 647 out by the entrance to March Ridge, just cutting down hordes that I hadn't decided to leave yet. My way back, I walked back through one of the neighborhoods and did some more exploring. I also found another generator that I could hook up by the gas station, as well as 2 boxes of nails to help me finish off the expansion. All in all, a pretty good day. 6:48 was spent finishing up the walls for the expansion room. Building out the roof would require more planks, and I really just didn't feel like spending more time on that right now. I used the rest of my planks to get a start on it, but I really didn't have a use for the room yet that wouldn't require more planks, so I'm moving on from that for now. On day 649, I went back out to the southwestern section of March Ridge with the goal of grabbing the fuel tanker and the ATV. Fuel tanker was a breeze, but I found out the hard way that you can't tow an ATV, or at least connect it to a heavy-duty vehicle, which sucked. Luckily, it only needed gas and a charged battery. Filled the fuel tank and brought the battery back to base with me to charge up before heading back out on foot to retrieve my new favorite toy. At least, that was the plan anyway. By the time I got the battery fully charged, it was too late and I was too tired to do anything. I spent the morning of 6:50 actually retrieving the ATV. After I got it back to base, I spent some time fixing up the mail truck. The hood and trunk were badly damaged and the windshield wasn't much better. Luckily, both the trunk and hood were fixable with 2 metal sheets, and there were a ton of cars that I could pull the windshields off of. By this point, it had started snowing, which ruined the original plans I had for the day, so I decided to put in some work on tailoring since I had nothing better to do. By the time I ran out of thread, I looked to be almost halfway through level 10, something to keep in the back of my mind whenever I decided to fuck around with another horde. Starting off 6:51 on a positive note, I leveled up my reloading skill first thing in the morning. Now on a gross, terrible, shitty note, it was snowing outside. Again. Decided to check out the dorms, had another incredibly close call when I turned the corner too fast and walked right into a horde. Luckily, I was able to walk away with only severe trauma and PTSD, so nothing too important. Now by early afternoon, I'd only been on the ground floor, but I had gathered over 100 units of thread, which has really always been the end goal, hasn't it? When I got back to base, I spent the rest of the day grinding out the rest of tailoring. 6:52 picked up right where I left off. That was until I ran out of thread again. Decided to head back out and check out the second floor of the dorms, where I found an arcade machine and a pinball machine, so pretty big win for the day. 6:53 was one of the first sunny days we've had in months, and I was determined to take advantage of it. The only issue I ran into today was that I had absolutely no idea what I did with my cowboy hat. Regardless of that, I decided to spend the day foraging. I know, shocking. By the end of the day, I had made some small progress and gathered a solid 3 chipped stones. Oh, I was also able to gather some more thread from some of the zombies hanging around by the fencing, which I used to wrap up tailoring on 6:54. After patching all of my current gear with leather strips for that boosted protection, I grabbed the generator, all my gas cans, and the fuel tanker and headed on over to the gas station down the road. This took forever because of how much fuel the tanker can actually hold, but hey, I'm not complaining. It was 100% worth it to have a tanker with enough fuel to fully operate my base and any car I came across. Now all I needed to do was get Nimble level 4. This took so damn long. Kept track of all the XP for this and started with 679 at 3:10 AM, and at 5 PM I had gained around 25 XP. This was something that I really wanted to knock out before continuing my mission that I'd planned all the way back in West Point, so I continued on in the morning of 6:56 until finally leveling up early in the evening. On the morning of 6:57, I hopped in the mail truck and headed west. There was a location out this way that I hadn't been to yet, hidden way off the road deep in the forest. It's a pain in the ass to get here without the overgrowth, but now that nature has started reclaiming the old dirt roads, it would be impossible to proceed by car. The amount of zombies in the highway made me anxious since we were still driving out there and I had already destroyed my windshield. Knew that I was by Rosewood, so zombies could have wandered over, but it still made me uneasy thinking about how bad the woods could be. After turning off the highway, I finally reached the start of the dirt road. Since my engine was already failing, I didn't want to risk being stranded due to a rogue tree popping out of nowhere, so I turned the mail truck around and decided to park it at the end of the trail. I had food and water in the trailer, but I just have to travel light, so I grabbed a couple cans of tuna and a few water bottles before trekking into the forest. I was actually able to travel a few hours undetected until I came across my first group of zombies. From there, it only got more difficult. I encountered a horde a little later on, and after I fired the chambered round of my pistol, I was immediately filled with regret. Zombies came from all directions, and it felt like the more I shot, the more that showed up. By the time the horde was taken care of, I was tired, exerted, and it was getting dark. Still had a ways to go to get to the secret military base, and I knew there'd be way more zombies hanging out there than I had just taken on in the woods. I encountered my second horde around 8:30 and decided it would be best to fight through it rather than try to go around them. Figured I'd have to go through them eventually, since there needed to be a return journey and there's only one pathway back out. It was completely dark by this point, and I wasn't in a fantastic position. As I continued my journey, I kept finding myself pondering over two important questions. One, was this even gonna be worth it? And two, why didn't I just throw a gender reveal party and clear the path the easy way? I was also kicking myself for not bringing a flashlight. It was so fucking difficult to find the pathway in the darkness. Eventually, with a lot of guessing, I was able to find the paved path leading up to the military base. I was bringing some friends with me, so I just had to hope I wouldn't accidentally sandwich myself between two hordes here. I arrived at the base's parking lot around 1 a.m., bringing a pretty sizable horde with me. This would be my best chance to clear out most of the zombies in the area, so I took full advantage of it. By around 5 a.m., I had cleared out most of the horde that had followed me in, and I'd also set up a campfire and fueled it up with rags. I'd snatched some matches off of a body back in the woods and could use that to light a fire, burning down the forest if I needed to, or wanted to, but it was definitely going to be one of those two. I was also able to get into a storage room after entering the base, where I barricaded the door and fell asleep on the ground. It'd be incredibly stupid of me to try and clear out a base while exerted and tired, especially since I was running low on ammo. First thing I noticed while looting was that this place was absolutely loaded with gear to make your own bullets. Primer and projectiles everywhere. If only I'd been able to save all that gunpowder I left in the workshop in West Point, I'd be on top of the world right now. Managed to find an M16, which I traded out my SCAR for since it was much nicer condition and it didn't risk any jams. I decided on a more stealthy approach since the last thing I wanted to do was get stuck in a closed corridor after alerting every zombie within a 10-mile radius. Decided to spend the night in the weapons room, which had 3 doors separating me from stragglers that might have spotted me. When I was coming back from securing the immediate area, I scared the shit out of myself when I walked directly into a zombie and tripped over it, scratching myself in the leg. 6:59 was all about loot. After some exploring, I was forced to shoot my pistol, which pulled a ton of nearby zombies. Spent a lot of the day constantly dealing with zombies that would wander on over. As the looting progressed, I'd start making a pile by the entrance so that I could have all my shit in one pile instead of carrying it around with me until I passed out.
Get it all together and put it in a backpack. All your shit, so it's together.
By mid-afternoon, I was tired again and found a hospital wing to hide in while I recovered. When I woke up early the next morning, I decided that it was going to be a death sentence if I tried to walk around in this darkness, and chose to wait in a storage closet until mid-morning, which apparently makes you incredibly depressed.
At least I'm safe inside my mind.
As shocking as it is to say, nothing too crazy really happened today. I followed the fenced path outside the gate, which just looped me back around to the gates. And after that, I did some more exploring and found the second floor room, which had 2 ham radios active and giving me weather updates, because apparently even though we're almost 2 years into the apocalypse, the fucking weatherman is still committed to his job. I was done with the military base by around noon that day, but didn't want to risk heading out and hitting nightfall before making it to my car, not including the drive back. Instead, I scavenged some books and magazines to cure my boredom and depression, and headed back to the weapons locker to spend the rest of the day there. I woke up around 1 o'clock and noticed I was nauseous. Must have been all the bodies piled up around the room I was in. Didn't really matter though, I was getting out of here. I grabbed my loot pile and made my way outside, where I found a small horde waiting around the campfire I just made. I was able to loop them around and eventually start a fire, letting them walk over it and catch fire. The return journey started with pretty high stakes. I became excessively exerted relatively quickly and was barely outwalking the zombies on fire behind me. Eventually, I was able to lose the majority of them and found a spot in the open field to rest. Once I was no longer exerted, the walk back to the truck was really simple. I made it back to the base that evening and dropped off all the shit I had brought back. It wasn't until next morning, on 6/62, that I realized I had forgotten my scar on the table of the military camp. Not willing to go back for it, I just accepted that I'd have to make do with my M16s, shotguns, and grenade launcher. Anyways, it was pretty gross out, and I wanted to wrap up base here, so I decided to take the trailer out and spend the day gathering over 100 planks. 6/63 was spent working on finishing up the rooftop. Thought I had a couple extra boxes of nails, but couldn't find any, and ended up running out that evening. That'd go on the to-do list for tomorrow, where I spent all of 6/64 going house to house in search of boxes of nails. As far as I'm aware of, the only place they can spawn is in the side closets in the houses, so that's where I checked. By the end of the day, I accumulated a whopping 3 boxes of nails. 6/65 was spent working on finishing the roof. I actually ran out of planks and had to go cut down more trees to finish it up, which worked out in my favor because I had another use for these planks. On day 666, I made 15 trap crates that I'd be able to use in a couple days. After that, I built 2 more gardening lanes and planted my cabbages. I'd use these as bait for the traps when they finished growing. I had some time to kill while I waited for the crops to grow, so I decided now would be a pretty good time to grind some foraging out. Took the ATV out for a spin, which seemed like a good idea until I love tapped a tree and my character reacted like he just took a shot from Ray Lewis. Nevertheless, I spent the entire day foraging, and I dare say I actually enjoyed myself. Not sure if it's because I actually have some levels in foraging now, or if they finally fixed the fucking item spawns, but I was actually able to locate usable items and eventually leveled up in the early evening. I figured 668 would be a great way to showcase how fantastic leveling your nimble skill can be. I'll just let the clips play out, and if you've seen any of the earlier episodes, try to compare it to something from 200 days ago where I had to keep turning and running away to reposition. Now that I'm level 4, I can stay constant and only have to start repositioning once I become exerted. This is what the end goal has been all along. Days 669 and 670 were spent working on my mechanic skill. There were 2 heavy-duty trucks in the opposite parking lot that I completely scrapped apart, keeping the best pieces for myself. Spent 671 exploring the eastern side of March Ridge. Really didn't do much aside from go to a few houses and kick the shit out of a small horde that had gathered in the area. But yeah, nothing too crazy today. On 672, I decided to work on my medical skill some more. I haven't really done anything with this in a while, but I got quite a few comments telling me to try standing over glass. So, doing my best emo impression, I took my socks and boots off and proceeded to cut myself for the next 6 hours. The idea behind this is genius. If you stand the glass, you'll immediately get glass lodged in your foot. Doesn't that just sound delightful, by the way? But if you remove the glass, say with tweezers for example, you'll get XP for it, and another shard will instantly be stuck in you. Something interesting with this that I found is that you can actually queue up removing the glass a seemingly infinite amount of times between each foot. So I did just that and was able to level up my first aid skill twice, which is not what I was expecting. On 673, I checked out the library in the community center and found First Aid Volume 4 really quickly compared to times that it took to find other books, like Metalworking 5 for example. But yeah, I just spent the day reading the next first aid book, and finished pretty late that evening, which was perfect timing for me. On day 674, I went out and grabbed another Mustang that I'd seen when I first arrived in March Ridge. Had a ton of gear to soup it up with, and decided that it was finally time to commit to fixing another car. It actually ended up taking most of the day because I couldn't be bothered to unhitch the damn trailer to just tow the car back, and instead wasted a ton of time walking back and forth from the base to the car. Spent the morning of 675 fixing up the new Mustang and installing some tuning pieces onto it before realizing that I needed more metal bars and pipes to add protection. So that became my new goal, and I started by going house to house, disassembling anything that I could find for more bars and pipes. The next 2 days were much the same. I fucked up and accidentally made protection for a Jeep instead of a Mustang, so I had to do more looting and disassembling to remake all those pieces. 678 was a good day. My cabbages were finally ready for harvest in the afternoon, so I grabbed 15 to use as bait for my traps, and threw the rest in the freezer to use for cooking later. Placed all 15 traps in the northwestern section close to the fence and marked it on the map. 679 and 680 were basically the same days. I went out and checked my traps in the morning, pulling in about 8 rabbits each day. After resetting the traps and heading back to base, I spent the rest of the day just cooking. Made a shit ton of soups and stir fries and threw them in the freezer for later use. I spent day 681 really just exploring. I didn't have a goal or objective in mind for the day, and I really just walked aimlessly through the streets looking for something to do. Found myself looting houses for a chance at finding something cool and just enjoying the game. As a side note, if you haven't noticed, I'm carrying a short blunt and an axe. The mindset with that is that I'm relatively close to leveling my axe, short blunt, and short blade skills, and just wanted to roam out whenever I got the chance. 682 was more exploring, albeit outside of March Ridge. Took the main highway all the way south to the end of the map where I found a motorcycle, but it was in too terrible a condition to bring back with me, so I just have to hope I can find another somewhere. If I'm being honest, a lot of the day was just spent driving around on the highways. I felt like respected slap champion Will Smith in I Am Legend just cruising through an apocalyptic city with a new Mustang. Early in the afternoon, I managed to find a small pocket of zombies and went to town on them with a pipe wrench before heading back to base and ending my day. Oh, and I had a moment that I thought was hilarious, and hopefully you all will too, but when I went to check traps that night, I was eating soup, and while some zombies wandered over, I don't know, just watching Bend Over slowly backpedal while just hosing down soup while zombies kept pace with him was just so funny to me. 683 was spent working on my short blunt skill. Found a couple patches of zombies roaming through the neighborhoods and decided it was time to break out the hammer to take care of them. .684 had some more combat, but the highlight of the day came when I leveled up cooking to level 9 when I was skinning some rabbits after checking the traps. On 685, I went back to grinding my first aid skill, and I gotta say, I'm a big advocate for the glass shards trick. I was able to level up twice in one day before having to wait for my health to regenerate again. Following the events of 685, I spent 686 and 687 reading the final first aid book. In the morning of 688, I leveled up my trapping skill and then went the rest of the day reading the next trapping book. At this point, I've kind of accepted that maxing all my combat skills will be damn near impossible, but leveling all my crafting and survival skills was definitely still a very real possibility. But don't get me wrong, I'm still gonna try to get as many skills as I can, but I'm just not sure there's a reasonable way to max some of these, like Nimble, for example, without making this completely unwatchable. 689 and 690 were spent wrapping up my first aid skill. If you break it down, I was able to pound out 6 levels in a combined 4 days. So if you're looking for the best way to level your first aid skill, grab some shattered glass and some tweezers and get to work. That's 5 skills we've completed at this point without fast learner or boosted XP gains, just full grind mode. On day 691, I harvested around 150 cabbages, replanted a full garden, and immediately went off to add bait to my traps. After that, I spent the rest of the day grinding cooking by making various stews and soups made using only cabbages.
So good and tasty.
The last few days were really spent trying to top off any skills that I was close to leveling. The original purpose of part 7 was to spend most of my time testing out different methods for grinding skills, but obviously some crazy events unfolded and I had to adapt and change course a little bit. That being said, we have just over 300 days left in the series, and while that sounds like a lot of time, when you look at all the skills I still have left to max out, it's going to be an uphill battle. Because of this, I wanted to take advantage of all the time available to me, and spent 692 and 693 working entirely on leveling up my sprinting skill. Also, we're going back to LV with this, but just assume I'm checking traps daily and I'll show if something worth noting happens. But I don't think showing me spending 45 seconds at my traps every morning will add to the video at this point. Next on my list was Short Blunt, so I grabbed a few hammers and headed to the southeast side of the city to group up some more zombies. After leveling up Short Blunt, I set to work on Short Blade using the same technique. Now knives took me a little bit longer than hammers, but that was expected. Still managed to round it off during the day though, so I was happy with that. Day 695, I got to work on my axes, but by the afternoon, I had barely made a dent, so I decided to just hang out around the base. Repaired the trailer trunk so that I could hold more, and stockpiled some planks for my next endeavor. 696 and 697 were almost entirely spent loading up my trailer with any items that I found worth taking. Mostly guns and ammo, oh, and the grenade launcher. That was an absolute necessity. Other than that, some propane tanks, metalworking gear, and some non-perishables, and most of the weapons that I could fit. Can you believe we made it almost an entire episode without any unnecessary hijinks? Let's change that. Luckily, I had a shit ton of food and my first aid skill was maxed, so all I had to do now was wait for my injuries to heal. Wine also helps. On the morning of 699, I was able to remove the bandages from my feet, but my leg, groin, and neck were still inhibiting me, and I'd be an idiot if I tried to leave the base while I couldn't move at more than a snail's pace. Kind of a bummer, but I dug my own grave on this one. Another episode in the books. I was still dealing with the burns to my groin and thigh, but all my other wounds were healed, thankfully. This episode was so hectic at times that I think if I was ever going to die, it would have been here. March Ridge has been my interim home for the last 70 days or so, and was an incredible journey to get here and to build what we have. There'd be no cabbages to harvest today, no traps to check. I turned the generator off, hopped in the car, and made my way through March Ridge one last time. I wanted to leave my respects for a city that gave me a home, so I did the only logical thing that I could think of. Until next time, my friends. Thanks for stopping by.